The emergency lights flashed red across the council chamber as Ambassador Lisa Monroe stepped through the massive doors. She had been summoned from her quarters in the middle of the night cycle, and the urgency in the message told her something terrible had happened. The chamber was already full when she arrived. Representatives from 17 different species sat in their designated sections, their forms ranging from the crystalline structures of the collective to the floating gas clouds of the ethereals. At the center podium stood High Chancellor Vorn, a Kethrani whose silver scales reflected the warning lights like 1,000 tiny mirrors. Lisa took her seat in the human section and looked around for answers. Next to her sat her assistant Karen Mills, a young woman who had served on the station for 2 years. Karen leaned close and whispered that 3 more worlds had gone dark in the outer rim. Lisa felt her stomach tighten. That made 7 worlds in 2 months. Something was eating its way through the galaxy, and no one seemed able to stop it. High Chancellor Vorn raised his forearms for silence. The chamber fell quiet. His voice carried through the translators mounted on every seat. He spoke of the Vraxen Swarm, a name that had become whispered in fear throughout council space. The swarm had appeared from beyond the mapped region 6 months ago. They did not communicate, they did not negotiate. They consumed everything in their path. Planets were stripped of all biological matter within days. Stations were torn apart for raw materials. Entire civilizations vanished as if they had never existed. The holographic display at the center of the chamber lit up, showing a map of the galaxy. Red markers indicated dead worlds. They formed a line that cut through the outer rim like a wound. Lisa studied the pattern and felt ice form in her chest. The line was heading directly toward human space. Earth lay right in the projected path. Chancellor Vorn continued speaking. He explained that Council military forces had engaged the swarm twice. Both times the fleets had been destroyed. The swarm fought with numbers that defied calculation. Their ships were organic, grown rather than built. They healed damage rapidly and adapted to weapons with frightening speed. Council analysts estimated the approaching swarm would reach the core worlds within 2 years if left unchecked. Lisa stood up, her voice carrying across the chamber. She asked what the council planned to do. Would they send more fleets? Would they evacuate the outer rim? Would they establish defensive lines? She reminded them that billions of beings lived in the threatened zones. Humanity had joined the council with the understanding that all member species would stand together against threats. The silence that followed her questions was worse than any answer. Chancellor Vorn looked at her with something that might have been pity in his alien eyes. He explained that the council had voted before summoning the session. The decision had already been made. All council forces would withdraw to the galactic core. Defensive stations would be established around the most populated systems. The outer rim would be abandoned. Lisa could not believe what she was hearing. She asked if they understood what they were saying. They were condemning entire civilizations to death. The Chancellor responded that it was unfortunate but necessary. The math was simple. They could not defeat the swarm in open battle. Better to save what they could than lose everything trying to hold an impossible line. Another representative stood, a being from the Sulvex Empire. He added that the council had made arrangements for refugees. Any species from the outer rim could relocate to the core worlds. They would be given shelter and assistance in rebuilding their populations. It was generous considering the circumstances. Lisa felt rage building in her chest. She asked how many people they expected could be evacuated. Earth alone had 12 billion inhabitants. The colonies throughout the solar system added another 3 billion. How many ships would the council provide? How much time? The Sulvex representative consulted his datapad. The council could provide transport for approximately 2 million refugees from human space. They had 72 hours to select who would come. The chamber erupted in noise. Lisa was not the only one shocked by the numbers. 2 million out of 15 billion. That was not evacuation. That was choosing who would die. She demanded to know why the council would not fight. They had fought other threats before. They had defeated enemies in the past. Why was the swarm different? Chancellor Vorn's voice cut through the chaos. He explained that the council had existed for 12,000 years. In that time, they had learned hard lessons about survival. Sometimes retreat was the only option. Sometimes sacrifice was necessary. The swarm could not be reasoned with or stopped. The best they could do was endure until it passed. Lisa looked around the chamber at the faces of species that claimed to be humanity's allies. She saw fear in every expression. They had already decided to run, and nothing she said would change their minds. The Council was not just abandoning Earth. They were abandoning every world that was not important enough to save. They were writing off entire regions of space as acceptable losses. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a small folder. Inside was Earth's membership charter, the document that had made humanity part of the galactic community 43 years ago. She held it up for everyone to see. Then she began to tear it in half. The sound of ripping paper echoed in the sudden silence. Lisa spoke clearly so every translator would catch her words. She said that humanity had not crawled up from the mud of Earth to become cowards. They had not survived ice ages and plagues and wars just to run when things got hard. Earth would not abandon its homeworld. Earth would not abandon its people. Earth would stand and fight with or without the Council. Chancellor Vorn warned her that she was making a terrible mistake. Humanity was young and did not understand the forces they would face. The swarm had destroyed species far older and more powerful than humans. Pride would not save them from extinction. Lisa dropped the torn pieces of the charter on the floor. She told the Chancellor that maybe humanity did not understand. Maybe they were too young and too stupid to know when they were beaten. But at least they would die on their feet instead of running away. She looked at each representative in turn. She wanted them to remember this moment. She wanted them to remember that when the galaxy needed heroes, the Council chose to be cowards. She turned and walked toward the exit. Karen followed her. Behind them, the Council chamber remained silent. Every eye watched the two humans leave. Lisa did not look back. She had a long journey ahead of her. Earth needed to be warned, and they had only 72 hours to prepare for war. As the doors closed behind them, Lisa heard Chancellor Vorn speak one last time. He said that the Council would honor humanity's sacrifice. They would remember Earth when it fell. Lisa kept walking. She did not care about being remembered. She cared about survival, and the Council had just proven they knew nothing about what humans were willing to do to survive. The message reached Earth 36 hours after Lisa Monroe walked out of the Council chamber. Every government received it simultaneously. Every news network broadcast it within minutes. The content was simple and terrifying. The Galactic Council had abandoned humanity. An unstoppable force called the Vraxen Swarm was coming. Earth had 3 months to prepare. General Frank Cooper stood in the command center beneath Geneva and watched the world react. Riots broke out in some cities as people panicked. Other cities became eerily quiet as the reality sank in. But within hours, something unexpected began to happen. The panic transformed into determination. People stopped running and started preparing. Factory workers reported to their shifts. Scientists returned to their labs. Retired soldiers contacted their old units asking to be reinstated. Captain Daniel Harris received his orders while docked at Mars Station. His ship, the Defiant, was being reassigned from patrol duty to reconnaissance. Command needed information about the swarm, and they needed it fast. Harris gathered his crew and explained the situation. Not one person asked to be transferred. His second officer, Jake Sullivan, simply asked when they were leaving. His science officer, Helen Carter, said she had already begun studying every piece of data the Council had shared about the swarm. The shipyards of Mars became a constant blaze of activity. Every construction bay worked around the clock building new vessels. The designs were not elegant. They were functional and fast to build. Engineers stripped away everything that was not essential and added more weapons and more armor. A ship that normally took 8 months to complete was now being finished in 6 weeks. Dr. Nathan Cole worked in a research facility on Luna. He had spent the last 5 years developing weapons that the Council had deemed too dangerous or too expensive. Now those projects received unlimited funding and unlimited support. His team tested a plasma torpedo that could burn through organic matter at incredible speeds. Another team worked on electromagnetic pulse mines designed to disrupt biological neural networks. The tests were promising, but there was no time for extensive trials. Everything would be tested in actual combat. Lieutenant Amy Parker led a fighter squadron based on Europa Station. She was 28 years old and had never fired a weapon in anger. Her training had been simulations and exercises. Now she drilled her pilots 12 hours a day. They practiced attack runs until they could fly them blind. They studied the limited footage of swarm ships until they could identify weak points instantly. Amy knew most of her pilots would not survive the coming battle. but she never said it out loud. Instead, she pushed them harder and made them better. The Defiant left Mars orbit 3 weeks after receiving orders. Harris took his ship toward the outer system where Council sensors had detected the leading edge of the swarm. The journey took 10 days. During that time, Helen Carter briefed the crew on everything known about the enemy. The swarm ships were biological constructs. They grew like living tissue and healed damage the same way. They operated in perfect coordination as if controlled by a single mind. Individual ships showed no fear and no hesitation. They would ram targets if it served their purpose. When the Defiant reached the detection zone, Harris ordered the ship to silent running. All non-essential systems were shut down. They drifted through space like a piece of debris. Sensors remained active but passive. They were listening, not transmitting. For 2 days, they detected nothing. On the 3rd day, the sensors picked up something massive. The swarm arrived like a wall of darkness. The ships numbered in the millions. They moved in formations that made no sense according to human tactics but possessed a terrible efficiency. Harris ordered every sensor recording at maximum detail. They needed this information. Helen Carter worked frantically at her station analyzing what they saw. She identified 3 types of ships: small fighters the size of trucks that moved in swarms of thousands, medium cruisers that seemed to coordinate the fighters, and massive hive ships that dwarfed anything humans had ever built. Jake Sullivan studied the tactical displays and calculated attack vectors. He told Harris that conventional tactics would not work against these numbers. They would need to target the command structure. Helen Carter agreed. She had detected quantum-entangled signals connecting all the ships. If they could disrupt those signals, they might create chaos in the enemy formations. Harris kept the Defiant hidden for 6 more days, recording everything. They watched the swarm consume an abandoned mining station. The ships landed on the structure like insects and began tearing it apart. Within hours, nothing remained but scattered debris. The efficiency was terrifying. Harris finally ordered a retreat. They had what they needed. The journey back to Mars took 8 days running at maximum speed. Harris transmitted his findings ahead so analysts could begin working immediately. By the time the Defiant docked, preliminary battle plans were already being drafted. General Cooper reviewed the data and made hard decisions. They could not meet the swarm in open battle. The numbers were too overwhelming. Instead, they would fight a delaying action using the outer planets as defensive positions. Earth's military began deploying forces to Neptune orbit. Mines were scattered throughout the region. Weapon platforms were positioned at key points. Every ship that could fly was sent to join the fleet. Admiral George Preston took command of the defensive line. He was 60 years old and had served in the Space Defense Force for 40 years. He knew this battle would likely be his last, but he never wavered. Meanwhile, civilian evacuations began, but not in the way the Council had expected. People were not fleeing Earth. They were evacuating non-essential personnel from the outer colonies to make room for military operations. Families moved from Europa and Titan to Mars and Luna, but millions volunteered to stay and support the war effort. Factory workers on Ganymede refused to leave their posts. Miners on Ceres continued extracting resources needed for ship construction. Mayor Claire Stevens led the lunar colony of New Seattle. She organized civilian volunteers to support military operations. Food production increased. Medical facilities expanded. Her citizens worked alongside soldiers preparing defenses. When reporters asked if she was afraid, she said that fear was natural, but surrender was not. Humanity had survived worse than this, and they would survive again. Dr. Cole completed his first batch of weapons and shipped them to the fleet. The plasma torpedoes performed better than expected in final tests. The EMP mines were ready for deployment. He started working on something new, something more desperate. If they could capture swarm technology, they might be able to turn it against them. It was a long shot, but every advantage mattered. Captain Harris and the Defiant were assigned to the first defensive line at Neptune. Amy Parker's squadron was transferred there as well. They would be the first to engage the enemy. Harris walked through his ship and spoke to every crew member. He thanked them for their service and told them that what they did in the coming days would determine humanity's future. Not one person asked to be transferred. The swarm was 96 hours away from Neptune when the final preparations were completed. Admiral Preston sent a message to all ships. He reminded them why they fought. Behind them lay Earth and everything humanity had built. The Council had walked away, but humans would stand. When the swarm arrived, they would find not victims but warriors. The message ended with a simple phrase that became humanity's battle cry: stand and fight. The swarm arrived at Neptune orbit exactly when predicted. Admiral Preston watched from Luna Station as the sensors detected them at the edge of the solar system. The scale was even worse than Harris had reported. Millions of ships moved in perfect formation. The mass of biological metal and chitin stretched across space like a living nightmare. Preston gave the order and the first wave of mines activated. The explosions lit up the darkness around Neptune. Hundreds of swarm fighters died in the initial blasts, but thousands more simply flew through the debris. They did not slow down. They did not hesitate. The human fleet opened fire with everything they had. Plasma torpedoes streaked across space, burning holes through enemy ships. Railguns fired metal slugs at incredible speeds. Energy weapons carved lines of destruction through the swarm formations. Captain Harris stood on the bridge of the Defiant and coordinated his ship's weapons. Jake Sullivan called out targets while Helen Carter monitored the swarm's communication network. She detected the quantum signals connecting them and confirmed what she suspected. The ships were not independent. They operated as extensions of a greater intelligence. Harris ordered his crew to focus fire on the medium cruisers that seemed to coordinate the fighters. Lieutenant Amy Parker launched from the Defiant's fighter bay, leading Crimson Squadron. Her 12 fighters formed up and dove into the chaos. The swarm fighters moved in patterns that seemed random, but possessed deadly efficiency. Amy's training took over. She rolled her fighter through a gap in their formation and fired her weapons at point-blank range. 3 enemy fighters exploded. Her wingman Kevin Price followed her lead and destroyed 2 more. The battle raged for 18 hours without pause. Human pilots flew until exhaustion forced them to dock and let fresh crews take over. Ships that ran out of ammunition pulled back to reload. The weapon platforms around Neptune fired continuously until their barrels glowed red-hot. Admiral Preston rotated units through the front line, trying to give everyone rest, but there was never enough time. The human forces destroyed thousands of swarm ships, but the enemy kept coming. For every ship destroyed, 10 more took its place. The weight of numbers began to tell. Human vessels started taking critical damage. The destroyer Pacific took 3 direct hits and lost power. Her crew evacuated moments before swarm fighters tore her apart. The carrier Shanghai fought off attackers for hours before a hive ship focused its entire force on her. She went down with all hands firing to the last. Helen Carter made a breakthrough on the second day of battle. She analyzed the quantum signatures and identified a pattern. The cruisers were receiving commands from the hive ships. The hive ships were controlled by something inside them. She called it a queen organism based on biological data. If they could kill a queen, the ships connected to her would lose coordination. Harris immediately saw the tactical value. He asked how they could identify which ships contained queens. Carter worked through the data, while explosions rocked the Defiant around her. She found it. Queens emitted a stronger quantum signal. She could track them. Harris contacted Admiral Preston with the information. Preston ordered all ships to prioritize queen ships. The new targeting data was transmitted across the fleet. Amy Parker received the update while engaging enemy fighters near Triton. She saw a queen ship marked on her display and changed course. Her squadron followed. They dodged through curtains of enemy fire to reach it. The queen ship was massive and heavily defended. Amy armed the experimental EMP torpedo Dr. Cole had designed. She flew straight at the target while her squadron drew off the defenders. At the last moment, she fired and broke away. The torpedo struck the queen ship's hull and detonated. The electromagnetic pulse washed over the biological systems. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the ship began to convulse. The fighters defending it suddenly stopped moving in coordination. They drifted or collided with each other. Amy's squadron took advantage and destroyed dozens before they could recover. The queen ship itself exploded as the EMP disrupted every system at once. Harris watched from the Defiant as sectors of the swarm battle line collapsed. The tactic worked. He ordered his ship to target another queen. Jake Sullivan plotted an attack run through the heaviest fighting. They would have one chance to get close enough. Harris told his crew to prepare for maximum burn. The Defiant accelerated into the heart of the enemy formation. Swarm fighters swarmed around them, but the ship's defensive weapons kept them at bay. Helen Carter locked onto the Queen's signal. Harris gave the order to fire. 3 plasma torpedoes and 1 EMP weapon launched simultaneously. The Queen ship tried to evade, but it was too large and slow. All 4 weapons struck home. The ship died and took thousands of swarm fighters with it, but the victory came at a cost. The Neptune defensive line was crumbling. Too many ships were damaged or destroyed. The weapon platforms were running out of ammunition. Admiral Preston made the hard call. He ordered all forces to fall back to Uranus. The retreat had to be orderly or they would be slaughtered. Ships began pulling back in stages while others covered them. The Defiant was assigned to the rear guard. Harris positioned his ship between the retreating fleet and the pursuing swarm. For 6 hours they fought alone against impossible odds. The hull took dozens of hits. Systems failed across the ship. A swarm fighter crashed into their starboard side and breached 2 decks before the crew sealed the section. Harris kept his ship fighting until every other vessel had escaped, then ordered maximum burn toward Uranus. They barely made it. The Defiant limped into Uranus orbit with failing engines and critical damage across all systems. Harris ordered the crew to begin repairs immediately. There would be no rest. The swarm would not stop. They had bought time with blood, but time was running out. The battle for Neptune had lasted 6 days. Humanity lost 42 ships and over 15,000 personnel. The swarm losses were estimated at over 200,000 fighters and 34 queen ships. The math was brutal. Humanity was winning individual engagements but losing the war of attrition. They simply did not have enough ships to kill every swarm organism coming at them. Admiral Preston held a command conference with his remaining ship captains. He asked for ideas. The situation seemed hopeless, but no one suggested surrender. Harris proposed focusing entirely on queen ships. If they could kill enough queens fast enough, the swarm might lose all coordination. It was desperate, but everything was desperate now. Amy Parker's squadron landed on a repair station near Uranus for maintenance. She had lost 4 pilots at Neptune, 4 friends who would never fly again. She did not have time to grieve. New pilots were being transferred in to replace the losses. She had to train them and prepare for the next battle. Kevin Price found her in the pilot ready room staring at empty chairs. He told her they needed her to be strong. Amy nodded and pulled herself together. There would be time for grief later if they survived. Dr. Cole received reports of the EMP weapons' effectiveness and immediately began producing more. Every factory in the solar system started manufacturing them. He also received samples of destroyed swarm ships and analyzed them. The biological technology was unlike anything human science had encountered. It grew and healed like living tissue but functioned like machines. Cole wondered if they could use it somehow. The idea was forming in his mind, but he needed more data. The swarm reached Uranus orbit 3 days after the Neptune evacuation. The human fleet was ready. They had used the time to repair ships and resupply ammunition. The weapon platforms around Uranus were more extensive than Neptune. The planet's moons provided cover and tactical advantages. Admiral Preston deployed his forces carefully. This time they knew how to fight the enemy. This time they had a strategy. Harris stood on the Defiant's bridge and watched the swarm approach. His ship was repaired enough to fight. His crew was exhausted but determined. Helen Carter had refined her Queen tracking system. Jake Sullivan had planned attack vectors for maximum efficiency. Amy Parker and Crimson Squadron waited in the fighter bay ready to launch. Across the fleet, thousands of humans prepared to stand against millions of alien nightmares. The second battle was about to begin. The battle for Uranus began differently than Neptune. Admiral Preston had learned from the first engagement and positioned his forces to exploit the planet's unique features. The 7 major moons became fortified positions. The ring system provided cover for smaller ships. Weapon platforms floated in precise formations, creating overlapping fields of fire. When the swarm entered weapons range, the human fleet was ready. Captain Harris commanded a task force of 8 ships assigned to hunt queen ships. Helen Carter had refined her tracking system and could now identify queens from much greater distances. The Defiant led the formation through the chaos, targeting high-value enemies. Jake Sullivan coordinated the other ships, ensuring they attacked simultaneously. The tactic proved devastatingly effective. 3 queen ships died in the first hour, and their fighter swarms collapsed into confusion. Lieutenant Amy Parker launched with a squadron twice the size of her original unit. Replacement pilots had arrived from Mars along with newer fighters equipped with improved weapons. She divided her force into 3 groups. One group engaged enemy fighters directly. Another protected the capital ships. The third hunted queens alongside the Defiant. Amy led the hunter group herself. She had become skilled at reading swarm formations and identifying which ships mattered most. The battle raged across Uranus orbit for days. Human forces used hit-and-run tactics. They would strike hard at a queen ship, then retreat behind the moons before the swarm could respond in force. The strategy worked, but demanded perfect timing and coordination. Ships that miscalculated were swarmed and destroyed within minutes. The carrier Boston made a run at a queen but got trapped by enemy fighters. She fought for 3 hours before her reactor failed. The crew evacuated, but many did not make it to the rescue ships. Admiral Preston watched the tactical displays from Luna Station and made constant adjustments. He rotated tired units out of combat and sent fresh ships in. He repositioned weapon platforms to support ships under heavy attack. When a gap appeared in the defensive line, he filled it immediately. The old admiral barely slept, managing the battle across millions of miles of space. On the 5th day of battle, Helen Carter detected something new. A queen ship larger than any they had seen before entered the system. Its quantum signature was 10 times stronger than normal queens. She realized this was not just a queen, but a primary queen that controlled other queens. If they could kill it, they might disrupt the entire swarm fleet in the region. She immediately reported to Harris. Harris contacted Admiral Preston with the information. Preston saw the opportunity, but also the risk. The primary queen would be heavily defended. Any attack would cost ships and lives, but if they succeeded, the payoff could change everything. He authorized the mission and assigned the Defiant to lead it. Harris would command a strike force of 20 ships and 6 fighter squadrons. Amy Parker volunteered Crimson Squadron without hesitation. The strike force assembled near Miranda and prepared for the attack. Harris briefed all commanders. They would punch through the swarm defenses in a tight formation. Once through, they would spread out and attack the primary queen from multiple angles simultaneously. Speed and aggression were essential. If they hesitated, they would die. Every captain acknowledged understanding. Every pilot checked their weapons one final time. The attack began with a massive barrage from the fleet's heavy ships. Thousands of missiles and torpedoes streaked toward the swarm, creating gaps in their formation. The strike force accelerated through those gaps at maximum speed. Swarm fighters swarmed them immediately. The escort ships formed a protective shell around the Defiant, while the fighters engaged the enemy. Amy Parker's squadron destroyed dozens of attackers, but more kept coming. Jake Sullivan plotted their course through the chaos. He called out threats and adjusted their vector constantly. The Defiant shook from impacts, but her armor held. 2 escort ships were not as lucky. The destroyer Memphis took a hit that breached her reactor. She exploded, killing everyone aboard. The frigate Denver lost engines and drifted helplessly into enemy lines. Harris forced himself to focus on the mission. Morning would come later. They broke through the defensive screen and saw the primary queen ship ahead. It was enormous, easily 3 times the size of any human capital ship. Its hull pulsed with bioorganic systems. Thousands of neural connections linked it to the surrounding fleet. Helen Carter confirmed it was controlling at least 40 other queen ships. Harris gave the order to attack. 20 ships opened fire simultaneously from different vectors. Plasma torpedoes burned into the primary queen's hull. Railgun slugs punched through armor. EMP weapons disrupted biological systems. The primary queen began evasive maneuvers, but it was too massive to dodge everything. Amy Parker led her squadron in close and fired every weapon she had. Her missiles struck a weak point and penetrated deep into the ship's interior. The primary queen reacted by calling every nearby swarm ship to defend it. Thousands of fighters converged on the human strike force. The escort ships formed a defensive perimeter and fought desperately to hold the line. The cruiser Atlanta positioned herself between the Defiant and the heaviest enemy concentration. She took hit after hit protecting the flagship. Her captain ordered his crew to abandon ship, then rammed his dying vessel into a cluster of swarm fighters, taking dozens with him. Harris saw they were running out of time. The strike force was being overwhelmed. He made a decision that terrified him. He contacted Dr. Cole on Luna and asked if the experimental AI virus was ready. Cole responded that it was untested and might not work. Harris said they were out of options. Cole transmitted the activation codes. The AI virus was designed to infiltrate the swarm's biological network and disrupt their command structure from within, but someone had to physically install it inside a queen's neural center. Harris realized what needed to happen. He told Jake Sullivan to take command of the Defiant. Sullivan started to protest, but Harris cut him off. This was not a discussion. Harris was going. Helen Carter refused to let him go alone. She knew the biology. She knew where to install the device. Harris needed her. He tried to order her to stay, but she simply walked to the shuttle bay. Harris followed, knowing she was right. They took 4 Marines and a combat shuttle. Jake Sullivan watched them go and felt fear like he had never known. The shuttle launched from the Defiant and accelerated toward the primary Queen ship. The massive vessel was heavily damaged but still fighting. Harris piloted through enemy fire while the Marines manned the weapons. They reached the hull and burned through with cutting torches. Inside the ship was a nightmare of organic corridors pulsing with alien life. The walls were covered in neural tissue. Strange fluids dripped from ceiling membranes. They fought their way deeper into the ship. Swarm defenders appeared from side passages. The creatures were smaller than their ships but just as deadly. They had blade-like appendages and moved with frightening speed. The Marines held them back while Harris and Carter pushed forward. 1 Marine fell, then another. Harris took a slash across his arm but kept moving. Carter's scanner led them to the Queen's chamber. The room was vast and filled with pulsing organic machinery. At the center was the Queen organism. It was grotesque beyond description, a bloated mass of flesh connected to thousands of neural cables. It sensed them and the entire ship seemed to react. Swarm warriors flooded the chamber. The remaining Marines formed a line and opened fire. Harris and Carter ran to the Queen. Carter pulled out the AI device and searched for the neural connection point. Swarm warriors were everywhere. 1 Marine went down fighting 3 enemies at once. The last Marine covered Carter while she worked. His weapon clicked empty and he drew his knife. Carter found the connection point and jammed the device into the neural tissue. The Queen convulsed. Carter activated the device and prayed it would work. For a terrifying moment, nothing happened. Then the Queen began to scream. The sound was not physical but transmitted through the quantum network. Every swarm ship in the system felt it. Harris grabbed Carter and they ran for the shuttle. The ship was dying around them. Corridors collapsed. Organic systems ruptured, spraying fluids everywhere. They reached the shuttle and launched seconds before the section exploded. Harris pushed the engines to maximum, trying to escape the blast radius. Behind them, the primary Queen ship tore itself apart. On the Defiant, Jake Sullivan watched the explosion and feared the worst. Then he detected the shuttle on sensors. They were alive. He ordered immediate retrieval. As the shuttle docked, he saw something incredible on the tactical display. The swarm fleet was falling into chaos. Ships collided with each other. Formations broke apart. The AI virus was spreading through their network like wildfire. Admiral Preston's voice came over the communication channel, ordering all ships to press the attack. The battle for Uranus had turned. The AI virus spread through the swarm network faster than anyone had predicted. Within hours, Queen ships across the solar system began failing. Their controlled fighters drifted aimlessly or attacked each other. The coordinated assault that had seemed unstoppable collapsed into chaos. Admiral Preston seized the opportunity and ordered every available ship to hunt down the remaining functional queens. The human fleet moved through the confused enemy formations like wolves among sheep. Captain Harris recovered in the Defiant's medical bay, while Helen Carter worked beside him. The wound on his arm was deep but not critical. Carter had bruised ribs and multiple cuts but refused to stop working. She monitored the virus spread and provided targeting data to the fleet. Jake Sullivan commanded the ship and continued the mission Harris had started. In 3 days, they destroyed 8 more Queen ships and the swarm presence around Uranus collapsed completely. Lieutenant Amy Parker flew mission after mission as the human forces pushed the advantage. Her squadron eliminated hundreds of confused swarm fighters. She was exhausted beyond measure, but the end was finally visible. They were winning. After months of desperate fighting, humanity was actually winning. When she finally landed and climbed out of her fighter, she collapsed from exhaustion. Medical teams carried her to the recovery ward where she slept for 18 hours straight. The cleanup took weeks. Millions of swarm organisms remained in the solar system. But without queens, they were just animals acting on instinct. Human ships hunted them systematically. Some fought back. Most simply drifted in space, slowly dying as their biological systems failed without direction. It was almost sad watching creatures that had seemed so terrifying, reduced to confused remnants. Dr. Cole examined captured specimens and made a disturbing discovery. The swarm organisms showed signs of having once been intelligent individuals. Their brain structures contained traces of higher reasoning that had been overwritten by the hive mind. Cole realized the swarm was not a natural species. Something had transformed them into weapons. The parasite that controlled them had consumed their identities and turned entire civilizations into monsters. He presented his findings to the military command and proposed something controversial. Cole believed they could reverse the process. If the AI virus could disrupt the hive control, it might be possible to restore individual consciousness. The transformed beings might be saved rather than destroyed. The proposal caused immediate debate. Many argued the swarm had killed billions and deserved no mercy. Others insisted that showing compassion was what separated humanity from monsters. The argument reached Earth's government. Lisa Monroe had become prime minister during the crisis. She listened to both sides and struggled with the decision. The swarm had nearly destroyed humanity. Every person on Earth had lost someone to the invasion. Vengeance would be easy and perhaps justified. But she remembered standing in the council chamber watching so-called civilized species abandon the innocent to save themselves. She would not let humanity become what she had despised in them. Monroe authorized Cole to attempt the restoration process on a limited scale. If it worked, they would expand the program. If it failed, or if the restored beings proved hostile, the project would end immediately. Cole began working with a team of specialists. They selected a dozen swarm organisms in various states of deterioration and began the procedure. The AI virus was modified to not just disrupt but repair the damage done by the hive parasite. The first attempts failed. The organisms died as their systems could not handle the restoration. Cole adjusted the process and tried again. On the seventh attempt, something changed. A swarm fighter that had been dormant for weeks suddenly showed independent movement. Its biological scanners indicated brain activity in regions that had been dead. Cole cautiously attempted communication. After several tries, the organism responded with what might have been words in a language no one recognized. Over the following months, Cole's team successfully restored 37 individuals from different swarm organisms. Each remembered fragments of their original lives. They came from species humanity had never encountered. The swarm had consumed their worlds generations ago. They had been soldiers, scientists, parents, and children before being transformed into weapons. Their gratitude toward humanity was profound and heartbreaking. 6 months after the battle began, Galactic Council ships appeared at the edge of the solar system. They broadcast friendly signals and requested permission to enter. Admiral Preston had been promoted to Supreme Commander of Earth's Defense Forces. He granted permission but ordered the fleet to remain on alert. The Council delegation was led by High Chancellor Vorn himself. They came expecting ruins and refugees. Instead, they found a thriving civilization that had accomplished the impossible. Ambassador Kelvin Shaw met the Council delegation at the rebuilt Neptune station. Shaw was a former military commander who had fought at Uranus. He had no patience for diplomatic games. The Council representatives expressed shock at humanity's victory. They offered to reinstate Earth's membership and provide aid for rebuilding. They wanted to study human tactics and learn how such a young species defeated an enemy that had destroyed elder civilizations. Shaw listened to their offers without expression. When they finished, he activated a holographic display. He showed them the casualty lists. Over 200,000 humans had died in the fighting. Countless more were wounded. The economic cost was staggering. Every family on Earth had sacrificed something. Then he showed them something else. The swarm was not gone. Human deep space probes had detected massive swarm concentrations beyond the galactic rim. The force that attacked Earth was only a scout fleet. The real invasion was still coming. The Council representatives went silent. Shaw explained that humanity now possessed the weapons and tactics to fight the swarm. They had paid for that knowledge in blood. If the Council wanted humanity's help defending the core worlds, they would pay for it. Shaw presented a list of demands. Full Council membership with voting rights equal to elder species. Access to advanced technologies previously restricted. Reparations for the cost of defending not just Earth, but the entire outer rim that the Council had abandoned. And most importantly, respect. Chancellor Vorn protested that the Council could not be dictated to by a species barely 50 years in space. Shaw smiled coldly. He told them the Council had a choice. Accept humanity's terms and gain powerful allies against the coming threat. Or refuse and face the swarm alone while humanity defended only human space. The Council could learn from their mistake of abandoning the outer rim, or they could repeat it. Shaw gave them 24 hours to decide. The Council debated through the night. Some wanted to reject humanity's demands out of pride. Others recognized the reality of their situation. The swarm was coming and they needed every advantage. In the morning, Chancellor Vorn returned with the Council's answer. They accepted every demand. Earth became a full Council member with unprecedented influence for such a young species. But Lisa Monroe knew the political victory was only the beginning. She stood before the United Earth Assembly and spoke of the future. Humanity had proven it could survive the fire, but now they had to carry that fire to others. The Council had walked away from the Outer Rim. Humanity would not. Ships were already being constructed for a new mission. They would travel to the abandoned worlds and offer protection. They would hunt remaining swarm forces and rescue any survivors. They would show the galaxy what it meant to stand together. Captain Harris accepted command of the new vessel Redemption. His orders were to map swarm territory and locate transformed beings who could be saved. Helen Carter joined as Chief Science Officer. Amy Parker led the fighter wings. Jake Sullivan served as First Officer. They were not going to war. They were going to bring hope to places the Council had forgotten. The Redemption launched from Mars orbit 6 months after the last swarm ship was destroyed in the solar system. Dozens of other ships followed with similar missions. Human colonies were being established in the Outer Rim, not as conquest but as guardians. The species that had been dismissed as too young and too weak were becoming the shield that held the line. Dr. Cole continued his work restoring swarm victims. The program expanded as more resources became available. Some restored beings chose to return to their home regions, if any remained. Others asked to join humanity's efforts. They wanted to help free others still trapped in the nightmare they had escaped. Cole built teams that combined human and restored alien specialists. They traveled with the fleet searching for more victims to save. On Earth, life slowly returned to normal, but nothing would ever be quite the same. Children played in parks while their parents worked to rebuild. But every family remembered the months when extinction seemed certain. They remembered how the galaxy's eldest civilizations had abandoned them. And they remembered how humanity had stood alone and won. It became part of human identity. They were the species that stepped into the fire when others ran away. Lisa Monroe sent a message to every world in the Outer Rim. It was broadcast on all frequencies in every known language. The message was simple but powerful. It said that the Council had walked away, but humanity had stepped into the fire. They had burned but not broken. Any species,